I'm Samantha Parker, 29, and last year I inherited my grandfather Mason's neglected bee farm. When I announced I was leaving my Chicago marketing career to restore it, my parents, Lisa and Robert, practically fell over laughing. "That money pit," Dad scoffed. "You'll be bankrupt in months." Mom called it a useless waste of good land. They didn't understand my connection to those 3 acres or the promise I'd made to Grandpa. 1 year later, their tune has completely changed. If you're watching this now, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments if you've ever pursued a passion that everyone else dismissed. Let's get into how this city girl transformed a dying bee farm into something my entire family now wants to be part of. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. The planner. The rule follower. By 29, I had checked all the expected boxes. Prestigious university corporate marketing job in downtown Chicago, sleek apartment in the right neighborhood. On paper, I was successful, but the endless meetings, pointless presentations, and soul-crushing commute left me feeling like a hollow version of myself. The one place I always felt genuine was at Grandpa Mason's bee farm. 3 hours from Chicago, those 3 acres represented everything my urban life wasn't: peaceful, connected to nature, and meaningful. As a child, summer weeks at the farm were magical. Grandpa taught me to respect the bees, not fear them. "They're little miracle workers," he'd say, his weathered hands gently lifting a frame dripping with honey. "They don't waste time with nonsense, and neither should you." When the call came that Grandpa had passed peacefully in his sleep at 87, something inside me broke. At the funeral, relatives spoke about his kindness, his work ethic, but none mentioned his passion for beekeeping. They saw it as his quirky hobby, not the purposeful lifestyle it truly was. The reading of the will stunned everyone, especially me. While my parents inherited his modest savings and my siblings received specific heirlooms, I was given the bee farm. To Samantha, the lawyer read, "Who understands the language of the bees." My mother gasped audibly. The family gathering afterward at my parents' suburban home turned uncomfortable quickly. "Well, at least the land has value," my father said, helping himself to another drink. "That developer who's been buying up property in the area might make you a decent offer." "Robert's right," my mother chimed in. "You could use that money toward a condo downtown." "Wouldn't that be lovely?" My brother Tyler snickered. "Sam with a bee farm. The girl who gets her dry cleaning delivered." My sister Rachel was gentler but equally dismissive. "Honey, you know nothing about agriculture. You kill office plants." They continued dissecting my inheritance as though I wasn't sitting right there alternating between mocking the idea of me as a beekeeper and strategizing how quickly I could sell. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out my laptop and found myself Googling beginning beekeeping and how to restore bee colonies. By morning, something had crystallized within me. I remembered being 10 years old watching Grandpa patiently explain how the entire colony worked together with perfect efficiency. "Everything they do serves a purpose," he'd said. "Not like most humans rushing around accomplishing nothing." 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation, shocking my boss and colleagues. I packed my apartment, put most items in storage, and drove to the farm with only essentials. The property looked worse than I remembered. The equipment shed sagged dangerously to one side. Only a few of the 15 hives showed signs of activity. The small cabin needed significant repairs, with water stains on the ceiling and mice having claimed corners as their own. Standing in the overgrown yard that first evening, doubt washed over me. The magnitude of work ahead seemed impossible. My parents' words echoed, "This was financial suicide, professional suicide." I had no agricultural experience, no carpentry skills, no business plan. Just a childhood memory of happiness and a stubborn streak my grandfather would have recognized. That first night in the dusty cabin, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the neglected fields gold, and despite my fears, something felt right. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. Trading my designer heels for rubber boots and my sleek apartment for a drafty cabin required more adjustment than I'd anticipated. My morning routine transformed from grabbing an artisanal latte to brewing coffee on a temperamental stove while watching bees begin their daily work. The silence was initially unnerving after years of city noise. No honking horns, no neighbors' arguments, just the occasional bird call and distant tractor. I began by taking inventory of what Grandpa had left behind. The equipment shed contained ancient extracting equipment, hundreds of frames in various conditions, dusty jars, forgotten tools, and decades of beekeeping journals stacked haphazardly on warped wooden shelves. Outside, only 4 of the 15 hives showed substantial activity. The others were abandoned, damaged, or occupied by wax moths and hive beetles rather than honeybees. My first hands-on beekeeping attempt was a disaster. Despite watching countless YouTube tutorials, I approached the active hives with city girl hesitation. I wore my grandfather's oversized beekeeping suit, which billowed around me like a marshmallow costume. When I pried open the first hive, my clumsy movements crushed several bees, causing the colony to react defensively. Panicking at the increased buzzing, I dropped a frame, sending bees into a frenzy. I retreated with multiple stings through my gloves and tears of frustration. "You move too fast," came a gravelly voice from behind me. I turned to find an elderly man in overalls, watching from the property line. "Bees don't like jerky movements or fear. They smell fear." Harold Wilson introduced himself as my closest neighbor, his 70 acres adjoining my small property. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of decades working the land. "Mason was a good man," he said simply. "Taught me about pollinators when I was transitioning to organic methods." "You, his granddaughter from Chicago." Harold became my first local ally, occasionally stopping by to offer practical advice or lend tools. His knowledge was vastly different from the online beekeeping courses I'd been studying. Less scientific, more intuitive, shaped by decades of observation. Through the local agricultural extension office, I connected with the Regional Beekeeping Association. At my first meeting, I felt painfully out of place among the mostly retirement-age attendees, who discussed queen genetics and winter survival rates with casual expertise. Eleanor Murray, the 5-year-old association president, approached me afterward. With silver hair pulled into a practical bun and piercing blue eyes, she had the no-nonsense demeanor of a former schoolteacher. "So you're Mason Parker's granddaughter," she stated, rather than asked. "He was one of the best natural beekeepers in the county. Unconventional methods, but his bees were always healthy." Under Eleanor's guidance, I began rebuilding my knowledge and confidence. She visited weekly, patiently demonstrating proper hive inspection techniques, helping me identify bee diseases, and teaching me to read the subtle signs of hive health beyond obvious activity at the entrance. My first small victory came when I successfully harvested honey from one healthy hive, extracting 20 pounds of amber liquid using Grandpa's restored hand-cranked extractor. The sticky, messy process ended with me collapsed in laughter on the shed floor, covered in honey but triumphant. I bottled my first batch in jars, cleaned from Grandpa's collection, and felt a surge of accomplishment I'd never experienced in corporate achievements. When my parents made their first visit to check on my experiment, as they termed it, their disapproval was palpable. Mom couldn't hide her horror at my faded jeans and calloused hands. Dad spent the afternoon pointing out structural issues with the cabin and calculating aloud how much money I was hemorrhaging each month. "This isn't sustainable, Sam," he insisted, gesturing at the modest improvements I'd made. "You had a career, a future. This is just playing farmer until your savings run out. You could still sell to that developer," Mom added helpfully. "Before you get in too deep, we just want what's best for you." Their visit left me deflated. My savings were indeed dwindling faster than expected. The cabin needed a new roof before winter. Equipment repairs consumed both money and time. I'd had to replace 2 dead colonies with purchased nucleus hives, an expense I hadn't anticipated. But despite these challenges, each small success fueled my determination. When the first new queen I'd introduced successfully mated and began laying eggs in perfect patterns, I felt an almost maternal pride. When I successfully split a strong colony into 2, effectively increasing my hive count, I called Eleanor to share my excitement like I'd accomplished something extraordinary. "I'm going to make this work," I told myself, each night falling exhausted into bed. "I have to make this work. Not just for financial survival now, but because returning to my former life seemed impossible." The bees had begun to change me, teaching patience and attention to detail I'd never mastered in the corporate world. 3 months into my new life, disaster struck. During a routine hive inspection, I noticed unusual behavior in one of my strongest colonies. Bees trembling on the landing board, others crawling aimlessly on the ground instead of flying. Inside the hive, the familiar, orderly patterns had given way to chaos. I photographed the symptoms and sent them to Eleanor, who drove over immediately. Her expression confirmed my fears. "American foul brood," she said grimly, pointing to sunken cell cappings and the foul smell emanating from the frames. "It's the worst disease in beekeeping. Highly contagious. The treatment wasn't treatment at all, but destruction. State regulations required burning infected hives to prevent spread." With tears streaming down my face, I watched as 3 of my 8 colonies were reduced to ashes. Each represented not just a financial loss, but hours of care and connection. That same week, a powerful summer storm tore through the area. I huddled in the cabin, listening to tree limbs crack and debris slam against the windows. Morning revealed the equipment shed's roof had partially collapsed, exposing stored supers and frames to rain damage. The repair estimate consumed the last of my savings. The local bank manager reviewed my loan application with thinly disguised skepticism. "Miss Parker, you have no agricultural experience, no proven income from this venture, and the property itself doesn't have sufficient value as collateral given its condition." His rejection was polite, but firm. The physical demands of farm life had begun taking their toll. My once soft hands were now perpetually stained with propolis, cracked from constant work. My back ached from lifting heavy honey supers and equipment. The isolation, initially peaceful, sometimes crushed me with loneliness, especially during evening hours when the day's tasks were complete. During one particularly low moment, I called my sister Rachel, finally allowing my brave facade to crack. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, voice breaking. "Everything's falling apart faster than I can fix it." "Sam, no one would blame you for coming home," she said gently. "You gave it a good try, but this farm was in decline for years before you got there. Maybe Grandpa meant for you to sell it and use the proceeds for something practical." The following day brought notice of a property tax increase I hadn't budgeted for. I sat in Grandpa's worn leather chair on the porch, watching distant storm clouds gather on the horizon, a perfect metaphor for my situation. "I'm failing you," I whispered, imagining Grandpa's disappointment. In a moment of desperation or inspiration, I began searching the cabin for anything that might help. The attic, accessed by a rickety pull-down ladder, had remained unexplored since my arrival. Among dust-covered boxes and forgotten furniture, I discovered a locked trunk. The key, I remembered, had been among those the lawyer had given me months earlier. Inside lay Grandpa Mason's detailed journals spanning 50 years of beekeeping. Unlike the casual notes in the shed, these were meticulous records. Weather patterns, queen genetics, honey production, and dozens of hand-drawn diagrams. Most importantly, I found his collection of specialty honey recipes: lavender-infused honey-spiced honey blends, bourbon barrel-aged varieties, and instructions for creating value-added products like beeswax, soaps, and candles. The final journal entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "The farm's future awaits the right guardian, someone who understands that survival requires adaptation. The bees know this instinctively. Humans need reminding." That night, I formulated a new plan. I'd been trying to restore the farm exactly as it had been in my childhood memories, but perhaps what I needed, was evolution rather than restoration. With Grandpa's journals as my guide, I began experimenting with small batches of specialty products. My first attempts were disasters. Honey overheated until it darkened and lost its flavor, beeswax candles that burned unevenly, soap that never properly hardened. But with each failure came learning, and gradually my products improved. I started with 3 varieties: lavender honey made with dried flowers from a small patch I'd planted, cinnamon vanilla honey, perfect for drizzling over breakfast foods, and a bold spiced honey infused with chili peppers that delivered a surprising kick at the finish. I created labels on my laptop, naming my business Mason's Legacy Apiaries, with a simple sketch of the farm as the logo. The local farmer's market manager seemed dubious when I applied for a booth, but granted me space in a less trafficked corner for the upcoming Saturday market. I spent the entire day before preparing bottling honey into sparkling jars, arranging them in wooden crates from the shed, practicing my sales pitch to an audience of unimpressed bees. That first market morning, I arrived nervously at my assigned table, arranging my modest offerings and handwritten signs explaining each product's unique characteristics. The initial hours were discouraging. Shoppers passed by with barely a glance, heading for established vendors with abundant displays. Around mid-morning, an elderly woman picked up a jar of lavender honey and asked if she could sample it. Her eyes widened at the first taste. "This reminds me of my grandmother's honey from the south of France," she exclaimed, promptly purchasing 3 jars. Her enthusiasm attracted others. By closing time, I had sold out completely and collected contact information from customers requesting future orders. Among those visitors was Marcus Jensen, owner of Grove, a farm-to-table restaurant in the tourist town 30 minutes away. With his culinary background and appreciation for artisanal products, he immediately recognized the potential in my honeys. "I'd like to feature these in our summer menu," he said, examining the empty display. "We could create a honey tasting board, perhaps pair with local cheeses. Our customers love knowing the story behind their food." Our partnership began with a modest standing order, but quickly expanded as Grove's patrons responded enthusiastically to dishes featuring my products: honey-glazed pork belly lavender honey ice cream, spiced honey cocktails. Through Marcus, I connected with other local food artisans: a cheesemaker interested in honey-ripened varieties, a brewery excited to collaborate on honey-infused mead, a soap maker who could help scale up my beeswax beauty products. I began documenting the farm's transformation on social media initially just to share progress with friends. My first post, showing the contrast between a decaying hive I'd inherited and its now thriving replacement, unexpectedly gained traction. Something about the restoration narrative resonated with people. Comments poured in from urban dwellers, harboring their own escape fantasies, and beekeeping enthusiasts offering encouragement. My following grew steadily as I shared honest glimpses of both successes and failures. Videos explaining extraction techniques, posts about the wildlife returning to the property as I restored native plantings behind the scenes. Looks at product development. I wasn't polished or scripted, just authentic, and viewers responded to that authenticity. The local newspaper caught wind of my story and sent a reporter to interview the city marketer turned beekeeper. The resulting feature, titled Sweet Second Act, portrayed my career change as courageous rather than foolhardy. The reporter seemed particularly captivated by the connection between my grandfather's legacy and my modern approach to preserving it. When my parents called after seeing the article shared on Facebook, their tone had shifted from dismissive to cautiously intrigued. "We saw your story in the paper," Mom began. "Your father's cousin in Milwaukee sent us the link." "The honey flavors sound interesting," Dad admitted grudgingly. "And it says you're supplying to that fancy restaurant now." Though they didn't apologize for their earlier criticism, their questions suggested growing recognition that perhaps my experiment wasn't merely a temporary phase. Still, Mom couldn't resist adding, "But is it actually profitable yet? These small businesses rarely are." The truth was more complex than I wanted to admit. While product sales were increasing steadily and my social media monetization had begun generating modest revenue, I remained on precarious financial footing. The infrastructure needs of the farm constantly threatened to outpace income. Yet, for the first time, I could envision a path to sustainability. That vision faced its greatest threat when I received news that the large property bordering mine on 2 sides had been sold to Verdant Development Group, a company known for converting agricultural land to residential subdivisions. 6 months after inheriting the farm, visible transformation was everywhere. The cabin sported a new roof and fresh paint in a cheerful butter yellow. The equipment shed stood reinforced and organized, housing both traditional tools and new equipment purchased with growing proceeds from product sales. My hive count had increased to 12 healthy colonies through splits and careful management. Inside the cabin, the musty furniture had been replaced with comfortable secondhand pieces. The spare bedroom functioned as my product workshop, filled with ingredients for infusions, packaging materials, and shipping supplies for the online orders that had begun trickling in after a popular food blogger featured my spiced honey. Mason's legacy apiaries had developed a small but devoted customer base. Saturday mornings at the farmers market had become my weekly connection to community, where I now confidently discussed varietal honey characteristics and offered pairing suggestions. Regular customers arrived with empty jars for refilling, embracing my sustainability discount program. My partnership with Marcus expanded as Grove's honey-forward menu items became signature dishes. We collaborated on seasonal offerings. Summer brought honey lavender lemonade and honey-drizzled grilled peaches, while autumn introduced spiced honey apple cakes and honey-roasted root vegetables. The collaborative mead project with Riverside Brewing generated unexpected publicity when their limited release Mason's Gold Honey Wine won a regional craft beverage award. The waiting list for the next batch provided guaranteed income for a substantial honey allocation. My product line had diversified to include beeswax candles in recycled vessels, solid lotion bars, and lip balms. Each item featured the distinctive Mason's Legacy logo and commitment to sustainable packaging. I'd begun hosting monthly bee experience workshops for small groups interested in learning beekeeping basics, generating additional revenue, and spreading awareness about pollinator conservation. Participants left with honey samples and enthusiastic social media posts that expanded my reach further. The most meaningful growth, however, was personal. My confidence had solidified into competence. I moved through hive inspections with calm efficiency, reading the subtle signals of colony health that once seemed like a foreign language. The physical demands that initially exhausted me now felt natural. My body adapted to the rhythms of farm work. This emerging stability shattered when certified mail arrived containing a notice that Verdant Development Group had purchased the neighboring 200-acre property. Their plans included a 150-home subdivision with artificial ponds, a clubhouse, and extensive landscaping, all requiring significant pesticide use during and after construction. My immediate concern wasn't competition, but contamination. Commercial pesticides posed a lethal threat to my bees, which foraged within a 3-mile radius of the farm. Construction would destroy vital forage areas and native plant habitat. The increased human population would bring inevitable conflicts with my beekeeping operation. When development representatives visited to discuss neighborhood integration, their rehearsed reassurances rang hollow. Our landscaping will include some pollinator-friendly plants, offered the environmental compliance manager, handing me a glossy brochure, and we'll post spraying schedules so you can keep your bees contained during those times. Bees forage up to 12 hours daily, I explained, frustration mounting. They can't be contained without starving the colony, and they don't read spraying schedules. The conversation deteriorated as I pressed for details on buffer zones and chemical usage policies. The representatives departed with vague promises to take my concerns under advisement. Research confirmed my fears. Similar developments had forced established beekeepers to relocate due to colony losses and homeowner complaints. Legal protection for agricultural operations like mine existed, but often proved inadequate against determined developers. The County Planning Commission scheduled a public meeting regarding the development's final approval. Despite my anxiety about public speaking, a residual fear from my corporate days, I prepared extensive documentation on the ecological impact of the proposed development and potential alternatives. The meeting room overflowed with attendees most excited about property values and economic growth. When my turn at the microphone came, my voice initially wavered but strengthened as I advocated not just for my farm, but for the broader ecosystem it supported. The bees from my farm pollinate crops within a 3-mile radius, including many of your backyard gardens, I explained. They support the wildflower populations in our nature preserves and the fruit production at local orchards. This isn't just about my business. It's about our community's environmental health. To my surprise, several attendees approached the microphone after me to express similar concerns. Harold, my neighboring farmer, detailed how pollination services from my bees had improved his organic crop yields. Representatives from the Regional Environmental Conservation Group presented data on declining pollinator populations nationally and the critical need for habitat preservation. Most unexpectedly, several prospective homebuyers questioned whether the development could incorporate more natural areas and stricter pesticide limitations. They wanted to live near farms and natural spaces, not eliminate them. The Planning Commission tabled the final decision, pending further environmental impact studies, a temporary reprieve rather than a victory. The developers' resources far outstripped our grassroots opposition. As I drove home under a star-filled sky so different from Chicago's light-polluted nights, anxiety knotted my stomach. The following weekend, my parents made their second visit to the farm. They arrived during market preparation, finding me elbow-deep in honey, bottling with music blaring from portable speakers. The contrast with their first visit was striking. The farm now hummed with productive activity rather than decay. Mom noted the improvements with surprised approval, particularly the cottage garden I'd planted with bee-friendly herbs and flowers. Dad examined the renovated workshop with reluctant admiration for my practical solutions to storage challenges. They listened with growing interest as I explained current projects and future plans. When I mentioned the development threat, however, their business instincts surfaced immediately. "This might be the perfect time to consider selling," Samantha Dad suggested. "Property values will increase with the new development nearby. You could get out while you're ahead, use the proceeds for something more secure." "You've proven you can make this work," Mom added, mistaking my silence for consideration. "But fighting big developers is expensive and usually futile. Maybe this is a sign to move on to your next adventure before things get difficult." Their advice, though well-intentioned, revealed they still didn't understand what the farm had become for me. Not just a business venture, but a purpose and identity I couldn't abandon at the first significant obstacle. The certified letter from Verdant Development arrived on a brilliant autumn morning that belied its contents. The company offered to purchase my property at 15% above market value, a generous accommodation in recognition of the farm's historical significance. The offer included relocation, assistance, and first selection of a lot in the new development if I wished to maintain ties to the area. The sum would clear my remaining debts and provide substantial capital for starting over elsewhere. The rational choice seemed obvious, especially given the uncertain outcome of our development opposition. I carried the letter to my favorite thinking spot, a wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree near the property's highest point. From there, I could see the entire farm. The cheerful yellow cabin, the orderly rows of white hives, the workshop where I created products, the wildflower meadow I'd established to support native pollinators. The developer's offer represented the easy path, one my former self would have taken without hesitation. The money would eliminate the constant financial anxiety, the physical exhaustion, the uphill battle against larger forces. But as I watched bees returning to their hives, laden with late-season pollen, something crystallized within me. This land represented more than financial investment or career redirection. It had become the physical manifestation of values I hadn't even realized I held until they were threatened. Environmental stewardship, community connection, meaningful work, honoring legacy while creating something new. I sought counsel from those whose wisdom I'd come to respect. Eleanor listened thoughtfully to my dilemma during an afternoon hive check. Mason faced similar pressure. In the 80s, she revealed, carefully examining a frame of brood. Developers wanted this land for a shopping center. He told me he asked himself one question: will I regret this decision when I'm dying? The answer made his choice clear. Harold was characteristically direct. Land's only valuable as what it produces, he said, leaning against his tractor. Money burns through fingers quick. Good soil and healthy bees are forever if you tend them right. Marcus offered a different perspective over coffee at Grove. Whatever you decide, your story and products have already changed how people here think about local food and farming. That impact continues regardless. While processing these conversations, I discovered something unexpected during a property survey. A section of my land contained a rare native plant community, including several endangered orchid species that thrived in the undisturbed soil near the stream. These plants provided critical support for specialist native bee species already threatened by habitat loss. The environmental group that had spoken at the Planning Commission meeting confirmed the significance of the finding. They suggested applying for a conservation easement grant that would protect the land from development permanently while providing financial support for ecological preservation activities. The grant application required extensive documentation. Soil samples, species, inventories, management plans, historical land use records. I worked night and day leveraging my corporate background to create a compelling presentation of the property's ecological importance within the watershed. My marketing skills, once used to sell unnecessary products, now served to articulate genuine environmental value. The waiting period strained my already precarious finances. Product sales slowed as I divided my attention between business operations and conservation efforts. The developer increased their offer, adding pressure with an artificial deadline for acceptance. My parents called weekly, alternating between concern for my financial security and frustration at my stubborn refusal to see reason. Even Rachel, usually supportive, questioned whether this battle reflected passion or simply fear of admitting defeat. The grant notification arrived without fanfare. A simple email on a Wednesday afternoon that I nearly overlooked among marketing newsletters. The conservation easement had been approved, providing a substantial stipend for ecological stewardship and permanent protection for the most sensitive portions of the property. More significant than the financial relief was the official recognition of the farm's environmental importance. The designation effectively created a buffer zone that would force modification of the development plans to protect waterways and wildlife corridors connected to my property. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the meadow, like earthbound stars overwhelmed by the realization that the farm would outlast me, protected for future generations, regardless of who eventually stewards it. The local news covered the story, framing it as David versus Goliath, small farmer successfully challenging corporate development through environmental advocacy rather than legal battles. The resulting publicity attracted attention from regional conservation organizations and sustainable agriculture networks. The developer, recognizing the shifting public sentiment and regulatory landscape, approached with a significantly altered proposal. A smaller, more environmentally sensitive development that would maintain substantial green space and include strict limitations on pesticide use. While not a complete victory, it represented a workable compromise that would allow both my farm and new housing to coexist. This resolution marked a turning point in how I viewed my role, not just as a beekeeper or product creator, but as a land steward with responsibilities extending beyond property lines. The farm had given me purpose, now it had given me voice. 1 year after inheriting Grandpa Mason's useless bee farm, the transformation was remarkable. 30 healthy hives stood in orderly rows, each painted distinctive colors to help returning foragers identify their homes. The once sagging equipment shed had been fully restored and expanded into a proper honey house with extraction equipment and packaging facilities that met commercial food production standards. The cabin retained its rustic charm, but now featured modern amenities and a spacious deck where visitors could watch hive activity from a safe distance. A small retail space occupied what had been the rarely used formal dining room, displaying the full product line in attractive arrangements. Spring had brought an explosion of blossoms from the native plant restoration project. Areas once dominated by invasive species now supported diverse wildflower populations that provided successive blooming from early spring through late fall, ensuring consistent forage for both honeybees and wild pollinators. The business had grown enough to justify hiring my first employee, Zoe, an environmental science student from the community college who approached me after a beekeeping workshop. Her enthusiasm for pollinators and sustainable agriculture made her perfect for assisting with hive management and production during her summer break, with potential for continued part-time work during the academic year. The educational component of the business had expanded beyond basic beekeeping workshops to include school field trips, pollinator gardening classes, and honey tasting events. These programs generated additional revenue while serving my mission of environmental education. Watching children's expressions transform from fear to fascination as they observed bees through observation hives became one of my greatest joys. Product distribution had expanded to specialty stores throughout the region. The original 3 honey varieties had grown to 12 seasonal offerings, plus a complete beeswax product line. The collaboration with Riverside Brewing continued with seasonal mead releases that generated advance orders and dedicated followers. My social media following had grown substantially, providing income through sponsored content related to sustainable living and small-scale agriculture. The authenticity of my journey resonated with viewers tired of perfectly curated content. They appreciated seeing real struggles alongside successes, practical solutions to everyday farming challenges, and the occasional mishaps that led to unexpected discoveries. The profile in Modern Farming magazine brought national attention, portraying Mason's legacy apiaries as an example of how small-scale agriculture could combine traditional practices with innovation to achieve viability. The writer particularly highlighted the synergy between environmental conservation and business success, how protecting native habitat had ultimately strengthened my operation rather than constraining it. When my phone rang with my parents' number one spring afternoon, I expected the usual check-in call. Instead, Dad's voice carried an unfamiliar hesitancy. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began cautiously. We'd like to come see the farm again. Get a better understanding of what you've built there. Their visit was scheduled for the following weekend. I spent days preparing, not from insecurity now, but pride in showcasing the operation properly. I organized tours for several retail clients during their stay so they could witness the business in action. I prepared financial statements demonstrating the farm's growing profitability and sustainability, knowing my father would appreciate hard numbers more than heartfelt explanations. When they arrived, the contrast with previous visits was immediately apparent. Mom had exchanged her usual dressy, casual attire for practical pants and walking shoes. Dad carried a notebook rather than leading with criticisms. I guided them through a comprehensive tour, the production facilities, hive areas, restoration projects, and new pollinator garden. I explained seasonal workflows, marketing strategies, and future expansion plans with the confidence of someone who now truly knew her business. They watched with evident surprise as customers greeted me by name at the Saturday market, asking detailed questions about specific products and sharing how they'd used last month's purchases. Marcus stopped by our booth to discuss autumn menu planning, treating me as a valued business partner rather than supplier. The revelation came during dinner at the farm that evening. As we finished a meal featuring ingredients from neighboring farms and my own honey, Dad cleared his throat with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Your mother and I have made a decision," he announced. "We're considering early retirement within the next year." Mom continued where he hesitated. "We've been thinking about our next chapter. Watching you today, the business you've built, the community you've created, it's made us reconsider our own priorities." "What your mother is trying to say," Dad interjected with returning confidence, "is that we'd like to discuss the possibility of joining you here. Not taking over," he clarified quickly, "but contributing in ways that make sense. I've always had an interest in woodworking. I could help with equipment, construction, hive components. Your mother's organizational skills could streamline your record-keeping order fulfillment." I sat in stunned silence, memories of their dismissal and mockery flooding back alongside the undeniable evidence of their current sincerity. "We understand if you're not interested," Mom added softly, misinterpreting my silence. "We haven't exactly been supportive from the beginning. We'd need to discuss parameters." I finally responded, professional language providing emotional distance while I processed their request. "Responsibilities, expectations, living arrangements." Of course, Dad nodded eagerly. "We'd purchase our own place nearby, not intrude on your space. And we're prepared to invest capital if expansion makes sense." As they outlined their vision, Dad handling production infrastructure, Mom managing administrative functions, while I focused on product development and education, I recognized the sincerity behind their proposal. They weren't seeking to control my success, but to participate in a lifestyle that suddenly appeared more fulfilling than their suburban retirement plans. The business part of me recognized the potential advantages. Their skills would address operational gaps, their capital could fund improvements. I'd been postponing their connections could open new markets, but the daughter in me remained wary, remembering the hurt their dismissal had caused during my vulnerable beginning. My initial reaction to my parents' proposal stemmed from complicated emotions. Vindication mixed with lingering hurt pride alongside wariness. Part of me wanted to reject their offer outright to protect the independence I'd fought so hard to establish. Another part recognized the potential for healing old wounds while strengthening the business. I took several days to consider before scheduling a proper meeting. During that time, I sought Eleanor's counsel, once again finding her working in her garden on a warm afternoon. "They laughed at you now. They want to join you," she summarized bluntly. "That stings, and rightfully so. But consider this. Your success didn't just prove them wrong about the farm. It challenged their entire worldview about security purpose. What constitutes a good life? That's a profound gift, even if it wasn't intended as such." Her perspective helped me recognize that my parents' request represented their own transformation, perhaps as significant as my own had been. When we reconvened at a local cafe, neutral territory, I arrived with clearer boundaries and an open mind. "I've given your proposal serious thought." I began setting the tone with professional directness. "Before discussing logistics, I need to address the elephant in the room. Your dismissal of this farm and my decision hurt deeply. I need to understand what's changed beyond seeing that I've made it financially viable. The uncomfortable silence that followed suggested they hadn't anticipated this directness. Dad finally spoke, his usual confidence replaced by reflection. I was wrong, he admitted simply. Not just about the farm's potential, but about what success looks like. I've spent 40 years measuring achievement in dollars and status. Watching you this past year, the purpose in your work, the community you've built, how much more alive you seem. It's made me question everything I thought I knew about what matters. Mom reached for my hand across the table. When you left Chicago, I was terrified for you. I thought you were throwing away security for a fantasy. I didn't understand that you were running towards something meaningful, not just away from something unfulfilling. We're not asking to join because the farm is successful now, Dad clarified. We're asking because what you've created represents everything we've realized has been missing in our lives. Purpose, connection to something larger than ourselves, work that matters in tangible ways. Their sincerity was unmistakable. The corporate executive and suburban homemaker who had raised me with clear definitions of success were genuinely seeking a different path in their final working years. We established clear parameters. They would purchase their own property nearby rather than living on the farm itself. Dad would focus on infrastructure projects, bringing his engineering background to improving production efficiency. Mom would manage office operations and coordinate the growing educational programs. I would retain final decision-making authority on all aspects of the business. Their financial investment would fund a dedicated production facility that would replace the converted equipment shed, allowing for increased capacity and improved workflow. The arrangement included a 2-year trial period with quarterly reviews to ensure the partnership remained beneficial for everyone involved. Our working relationship developed gradually. Dad's precision complemented my intuitive approach to problem solving. Mom's organizational systems brought order to the administrative chaos I'd been neglecting. Their connections in the business world opened doors to corporate gifting programs that significantly increased holiday season revenue. More meaningful than the business improvements was the healing of our family relationship. Working alongside each other created space for conversations that might never have happened otherwise. During long days processing honey harvest, Dad shared regrets about his own abandoned dreams of entrepreneurship. While packaging holiday gift sets, Mom revealed how she'd once considered teaching before prioritizing supporting Dad's career. I always thought I was protecting you by pushing toward the secure path, Dad told me one evening as we finished a hive construction project. I never considered that safety might come at the cost of fulfillment. The farm expanded its mission that year. Beyond honey production and education, we established a mentorship program for aspiring agricultural entrepreneurs, particularly those transitioning from urban careers. My parents' perspective proved invaluable to participants navigating similar family resistance to unconventional choices. The pollinator gardens expanded to include demonstration plots showing how bee-friendly plantings could integrate with traditional landscaping. Local garden clubs and homeowner associations began consulting us about creating community pollinator corridors through residential areas. The developer ultimately redesigned their project as a conservation community that preserved significant green space and incorporated sustainable landscaping principles. While not my preferred outcome, it represented a workable compromise that allowed both progress and preservation. On the anniversary of my inheritance, I visited Grandpa Mason's grave with a jar of honey from his original hives, now thriving under my care. I imagined his satisfaction at seeing the farm's evolution. Not preserved as a museum piece, but adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential purpose. The lesson I carried from that transformative year wasn't just about beekeeping or business. It was about having the courage to follow an authentic path even when those closest to you doubt its wisdom. About recognizing that true security comes not from avoiding risk, but from building something meaningful enough to warrant the risk. About understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can offer others is demonstrating that alternative choices are possible. The journey from corporate marketer to beekeeper hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had required facing failure, embracing uncertainty, and challenging deeply held assumptions about success. But sitting on the farmhouse porch that evening, watching my parents and Zoe discuss next season's planting schedule, while bees returned to their hives in the golden light, I knew I'd found something. Most people spend lifetimes seeking work that healed rather than depleted, connection that transcended transaction and purpose aligned with deeper values. Have you ever taken a leap of faith that others dismissed, only to find it led to unexpected fulfillment? Or perhaps you're standing at that crossroads now, hearing the voices of doubt, while something inside pulls you toward an unexpected fulfillment. Unconventional path. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to follow our continuing journey at Mason's Legacy Apiaries. Remember, sometimes the sweetest success comes from the choices others find hardest to understand. Thank you for being part of this journey, and until next time, may you find the courage to follow your own path to fulfillment.